Hi everyone. I'm going to try a tactical exercise I read about on chess.com. They call it the perfect 10, and the idea is to try to solve 10 puzzles in a row that are geared at your rating, just general puzzles, without making any mistakes. And you're supposed to do it without paying attention to the clock. So time doesn't matter. Take your time and be accurate. This is a good exercise to test not only your tactical abilities, but your visualization and your calculational skills. You can do this either on chess.com or Lichess or other places that have difficult puzzles that are geared at your puzzle rating. So I'm going to go ahead and try this. Hopefully I can do this in under an hour, but I'm not going to really be timing myself. Okay, and if I make a mistake, I'll quit and try it again another day. All right, so looks like white's down some material here. So strange material imbalance. Yeah, white has a bishop for a queen and a rook. Okay, so white's down a lot of material. Looks like black just took a rook there, so there's an obvious recapture, but winning a piece back is not good enough. So there's a bishop lined up with the king. There's a knight in the way, so we have some discovered checks possible. In fact, we have two double checks. Those are extremely forcing moves, double checks, because they force the king to move. There's no other way to get out of a double check other than moving the king. So those are actually the first two candidates we will look at before we do anything else. Okay, so let's start with knight takes e7 check. Okay, after knight takes e7 check, king is forced to h8. It's the only move. Okay. Then there's a follow-up check here on g6. The king can't move back to g8 because the bishop has that square covered. So pawn takes knight is forced. And then we have rook takes h1 check. And the only way to get out of check is to block with the bishop. Then we have rook takes bishop check. King would have this square on g7 because the bishop has moved. Do we have a follow-up? It's a little complicated. I'm getting a little hazy on the visualization. Let me do this without drawing the arrows. So knight takes e7 check, king h8, knight g6 check, h takes g6, rook takes h1 check, bishop h6, rook takes bishop check, king g7. Then there is rook takes g6 check. And then the rook can go maybe to h7. And at that point, I'm out of checks, out of safe checks. That doesn't seem to work. What if we try, we have another knight here. What if we try knight takes e7 check, forcing the king to h8, and then check with this knight. And then takes. So we'll still have a knight sitting here to help. So let's run through that without the arrows. So knight takes e7 check, king h8, knight from the f file to g6 check, h takes g6, rook takes h1 check, bishop h6, rook takes h6 check, king g7, Rook takes G6 check, King H7. I don't see anything in that line either. Okay, I'm going to turn my attention to the other double check now. Knight takes F6 check, forces King H8, Knight to G6 check, forces H takes G6, Rook takes H1 check, forces Bishop H6, Rook takes H6 check, King comes up. I'm a little hazy again. Let me get rid of the arrows. Arrows kind of bother me. So let me say that without drawing the arrows. Knight takes F6 check, King H8, Rook, Knight to G6 check, H takes G6, Rook takes H1 check, Bishop H6, Rook takes H6 check, King to G7, Rook takes G6 check. That forces the king back to H8 since the knight on F6 has H7 covered. Then Rook to H6 check forces the king back to G7, and then Rook to H7 check. It's actually mate. Yeah, there's a mate in that line if I saw that correctly. I may have actually inserted an unnecessary move in the line. But let's play that. So still, I'm not crystal clear. I'm a little hazy with the visualization, but I believe I saw a mate here, and then here, here. Okay, the puzzle ended. Let me see what the analysis board shows. Okay, so let's start that again. Check, forcing the king over. Check. 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 Yeah, and here Rook to H7 is just mate. I had inserted this in my analysis, forcing the king here, and then back here, and then mate. So I put in an extra useless pair of moves. Okay, but I found the mate, so I'm happy with that. Okay, so that's one down. We'll see the number here. There's one green dot there for puzzle solved. It took me 6 minutes and 38 seconds. Let's try another. Okay, so messy position. So let's see. Looks like black is up a rook for a couple pawns. All right, white just uncovered an attack here on F7. Is that a mating threat? Check, king goes over. Check, king goes over again. Yeah, that's a no. Yeah. Yeah, that's a mating threat. So I don't have time for quiet moves. Okay. So I can't play something like bishop takes C1 and then just get mated. So another forcing move, queen takes F2 check, rook takes F2 is forced, rook takes C1 check, rook goes back. Rook takes rook, king takes rook, knight to e3 check, forking the king and the queen. Black is already up a little material. Let's see, how does that work out? Let me do that without the arrows. So you just look for these forcing moves and follow them to the end. So queen takes f2 check. King can't go in the corner, it would get mated. So rook takes f2. I have to play with checks here. After rook takes f2, there's rook takes c1 check. And then either the knight blocks on d1, in which case I can take the queen, or the rook goes back to f1 and blocks. And then I take the rook with my rook, forcing king takes rook, and then knight d3 check, winning his queen. I think I'm up a lot of material there. Let's see. I didn't even count the exchanges. So if I take the pawn with my queen on f2, I'm getting a pawn for my queen, but then I'm taking the bishop. I'm getting a pawn and a bishop for my queen. Then we're exchanging rooks. And then I'm getting the queen back. And he's getting my knight. Looks like if I counted that correctly, I'm just gaining one pawn in that transaction. But I'm diffusing his attack on f7 because I'm trading everything off. And I was already up material. Gaining another pawn and diffusing the attack sounds good to me. Okay, let me make a quick check to see if there are any other candidate moves, but I think queen takes f2 is the way to go. There are no other checks. I can make defensive moves. There aren't too many ways to defend f7. There's knight to h6. Seems kind of silly to retreat a knight and attack nothing. Yeah, actually, I just noticed now there's a more immediate threat. Well, not more immediate, but there's another threat. There's a queen to c8 check, forcing me to block with the queen. Then if he takes my queen and I take back, he has this forking the king and the rook. So there's two threats. I can't really defend against them both, so I have to go on the offensive here. Queen takes f2 is the only checking move, and I analyzed that to winning a pawn and diffusing his attack. So I'm going to go for that. Okay, and then we take the bishop with check. We take the rooks off the board, and then we fork, and we take the queen. Yeah, I'm just up a rook. It's very clear now. If he takes back here, he does have a mass of pawns over here on the queen side, but I'm up a rook. I'm threatening that pawn. I can drive the knight back. I can take that pawn right away and get ready to castle. Looks pretty safe. Yeah, that's a clear win. Okay, that's 2 down. Let's try another one. Okay, what's going on here? So black has a rook for a queen, so black's down material. There's some heavy pieces lined up here. So candidate moves that come to mind are either bishop to f7 or bishop to d7 to protect the rook and unleash an attack on the queen, which is pinned to the king. However, if I do that now, bishop to f7, for example, he takes the rook with check, I take the queen, and then he takes my rook. And he's just up a whole rook in that line. So bishop to f7 is no good here. Bishop to d7 is no good for the same reason. So another move is bishop to g4 check. Let's say he blocks with f3. Then I take the queen with check. And I'm just up a rook. My bishop is hanging, but his rook is hanging. For example, if he just steps out of check, I can first trade the rooks and then save my bishop, and I'm up a whole rook. So bishop to g4 check looks good. The only way to get out of check is to move the king or play f3. In either case, I take his queen. Actually, I do have to be careful. Bishop g4 check, what if his king goes to d3, and then if I take his queen, it's not with check, which means he can then take my rook. Yeah, material is equal. All right, so that might not work. Another candidate move is rook takes f1. For example, if he takes my rook back with the king, there's bishop to h3 check. And he moves the king, and I win the queen, and I'm up a rook. So he can't take the rook back with the king. Maybe he wants to get the queen off of the e-file then. I don't know, queen here, for example. Then I can play bishop to h3 check, protecting my rook. Then we're just playing two rooks for a queen. And my pawn, my d pawn is vulnerable. I don't like that. Rook takes f1. Just queen to c7, for example. What do I do there? In other words, just winning a rook here is probably not good enough to win the game. Okay, so I looked at four candidate moves: the rook takes f1 move, the bishop to g4 check, bishop to f7, bishop d7. Pretty sure I was correct in eliminating these two moves because either one, queen takes rook check, forcing bishop takes queen, and then rook takes rook. Okay, so down to two candidate moves here. So what other candidate moves are there? Any others? No other sensible place to move this bishop other than with check or protecting my rook, because otherwise the queen is just going to take the rook. Don't want to move this rook and just lose the bishop with check. Can't really think of any other move with this rook other than taking that one. Maybe here and threaten that, I don't know. Seems really slow. If I go here, you can just move the queen somewhere. So I gotta think it's either bishop g4 check or rook to f1. So let's look at those again. Bishop g4 check. So the move that worried me was king to d3. I've got an idea. I don't know if it works. Bishop to g4 check, king to d3. What about bishop to e2 check there, forking the king and the rook? Because if he takes the bishop with the king, then I can take the queen with check. And if he moves the king away, I was thinking I would get his rook, but he can actually block the check with the bishop. But then I can win the pinned bishop. No, not with my rook hanging. It's kind of complicated. Bishop, let me do it without the arrows. Bishop g4 check, king d3, bishop e2 check. Well, there's even queen takes e2 in that line. Yeah, that's just winning. Queen takes e2. So that doesn't work. So bishop g4 check, king d3, I need another move. Rook takes the queen on e5, allows him to take my rook. Wow, this is hard. What am I missing? Hard puzzle. Let's go back to rook takes f1. So he can't play king takes f1 because of bishop to h3 check that wins. So what if he gets the queen to safety somewhere, maybe even over here? Then I either move my rook to safety or I protect it with the bishop with check. Don't see anything there. Okay, what about rook e1 check? Rook takes e1. Check. It's nothing there. Okay, I'm kind of stuck on this one. Perfect 10 is in jeopardy. Rook takes f1, I think, is just refuted by moving the queen. Can't just sit and wait. My rook is hanging two ways. I can't just move it somewhere like here. It's got to be bishop g4 check, but I'm not seeing what happens after king to d3. Just an equal endgame. Rook takes queen. Rook takes rook. Oh, that's just stupid of me. Bishop to g4 check, king to d3. Do I first save the rook here with check and then take the queen? So bishop g4 check, king d3. Rook a3 check. Then queen to c3 blocking the check. I take the queen. He takes back. Oh, and then rook, then bishop here, check, forking the king and the rook. Ooh, I think that's it. Okay, let me say that again, make sure I calculated that correctly. Bishop to g4 check, king d3, rook a3 check, Now, if he moves the king or blocks with his bishop, I'm just going to take the queen and win. So he has to block with the queen. So queen to c3 blocks. Then rook takes the queen. Oh no, I was thinking bishop takes the queen and then bishop to e2 check, but he can play king takes the queen. Oh, this is infuriating. Then it's just an equal endgame again, where I have the weaker pawn here on the d file. It doesn't work. Ugh. Oh, before I take the queen, I play bishop to e2 check, forking, and then I take the queen. Yes, that works. Okay, just change the moves around. Let me say that now. Bishop to g4 check, king d3, rook a3 check, queen c3, bishop e2 check, king moves somewhere like c2 or d4. I take the queen, he takes back with either the king or the bishop, and then I take his rook and I'm winning. Okay, that is it. 12.5 minutes. Let's see. Let's play it. Check. Okay. Check. Oh, he just moves and protects the queen. I didn't consider that line. Oh. I was expecting, oops, I don't want to move that. I was expecting that block. I just did not consider that line. This line might be easier though. What about check? He's trying to stay in contact with the queen. If he comes up here, I check, and then the two rooks are pointed at the queen and win. I think this line's easier. Yeah, that's it. Let's just make sure. I don't want to lose a puzzle after 13 minutes. So rook to a4 check. You can block with the bishop, lose the bishop, and then still face the same check. I suppose that might be the way to go, actually. If he blocks with the bishop and I take the bishop, he comes over here to evade the check. I take the queen, he takes my rook, and then he's just a bishop down instead of a rook down. Either way, it's losing. So if he doesn't block with the bishop, he moves the king away from the queen, I take the queen. The only move to keep in contact with the queen is here. Oh, I can't play rook to a5. His bishop has that covered. What do I do after the king goes there? So here, check. Ugh, what's going on? Maybe here, check. Yeah. Forcing the king up here. What a puzzle. This is a great puzzle. And then the king comes down here, check. And he can't stay in contact with the queen anymore. That might be it. Let's say that again without the arrows. So rook to a4 check, king takes d5, bishop to f3 check, king to d5, rook, not d5, king to d6. Let's say that again, I misspoke. Rook to a4 check, king takes d5, bishop to f3 check, king to d6, rook to a6 check, and the king moves away from the queen and I take it. That's it. Okay. Check, check, we take it. Wow, what a puzzle. 2477 rated puzzle. Target time 1 minute 3 seconds. It took me 16 minutes to solve that puzzle. So many lines. I want to look at it in the analysis board here. Okay, this is at the beginning. So I wanted to illustrate some of the lines, like for example, how moving the bishop here doesn't work because queen takes, bishop takes, rook takes. So we mentioned that line. We mentioned rook takes here doesn't work. That just leads to equality after moving the queen somewhere, like here. And then I have to move this rook to safety somewhere. I don't know, here. Yeah, and then I can get the rooks connected, and it's just an equal endgame, the engine says. Okay, so that didn't work. So the only candidate move I had was this one. And then the only move that white has is king to d3. For example, if he blocks it, then we take the queen with check. He maybe moves the king over, and we take that with check, and we're up a bishop. Okay, so he can't block the check. Doesn't want to move up and lose the queen with check. Only move is to get out of the way so that if I took the queen, that would be a mistake because he'd take my rook and we have another equal endgame. Actually, he's doing better because that pawn is so weak. Okay, so after he moves up, we check. And then here, I was looking at the line queen to c3. The engine suggests king to d4 is a little bit better than queen to c3. They're all losing though, or bishop to c3. So I was looking at this line, and I was saying you can't do this because he doesn't have to take with the bishop and allow this fork. He can take with the king, and then I have no fork, and again, it's an equal ending. So after the queen blocks, I would have played bishop d2 check first, and then the king has to get out of check on one of these two squares. Doesn't really matter which. And then, and then I take the queen, and then he captures with either piece, and I get the rook, and I'm a rook up. Okay, so that's what would have happened, bishop to e2 check, if he had blocked with the queen. So instead, he comes up with the king. And now I have to check him away from the queen here so I can take the queen without losing the rook. So check. He has to stay in contact with the queen. This is the only move. I don't have this move available. The bishop has it covered. So the only check here that makes any sense is this one. And now again, he has to stay in contact with the queen, but now this wins because he has to move away, either here or here or here. And wherever he moves, we get the queen and we're a rook up. And that's it. Okay, that was a tough puzzle for me. I'm in the middle of doing 10 puzzles in a row here. But this is taking a lot longer than I thought it would. I'm 34 minutes into the video and I just finished 3 puzzles. So I liked that last puzzle. I think I'm going to clip that one out instead of uploading all 10 of these. All right, thanks for watching the video.